Welcome everybody. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. This time last week, I said we did a webinar and I was saying I had a bit of man flu. Actually turned out I had COVID. So by the next day I was raging 40-degree temperature, but I'm recovering and hopefully back in action now. So good to see you all. So today's Scribe Academy, the topic is grant writing and funding opportunities for town and parish councils. My name is John Pagan and I'm the CEO here at Scribe. I'll be hosting you today, and I have my colleague Jess here, manning or handling the chats. Wave Jess and say hello. I can't hear you, Jess.
Morning.
Morning, good. So yes, I met Mike, I approached Mike. He was talking at an event in Yorkshire, ARC event, the AGM there. The room was absolutely packed out, and yeah, Mike came up and gave shared his experience, knowledge and tips on grant funding. He has lots of experience in this. He has over 25 years experience in successfully writing funding bids for community or environmental projects. Himself was a former councillor, Nozzle Parish Council, where he successfully raised £200,000 in funding. So yeah, he is I would say he is definitely an expert on this topic, which he's going to be giving us about a 30-minute talk on grant funding. But first, Mike, apart from your professional experience, what else do you like doing in your spare?
That's on the spot, isn't it? I'm actually I do quite like gardening and I've got my allotment as well, which sounds very old-fashioned, doesn't it? Makes me sound very old, but that was great during the pandemic, I must admit.
No, I wouldn't say allotments are. I mean, they're kind of almost trendy now, particularly.
They are, yeah. I'm a bit of a hipster, really.
Yeah, a bit of a hipster. That's what you're looking for. Yeah, good. Yeah, cool. Oh, no, I didn't share the results there. I'll share those with everyone there while that's running. So cool. So over to you, Mike.
Okay, I'll just share my screen just very quickly. Hopefully, you should all get this. Can everyone see that?
That's perfect.
Is that okay? Yeah, okay then. I'll just say something extra quickly about myself in a moment. I didn't realise John was going to introduce me in that way as well, but I'll be using his PowerPoint presentation this morning, and it's actually going to be around 45 minutes. So if there's a problem with that, I can try and make it shorter, and hopefully we'll have time for questions after.
Fine.
Okay, just very quickly about myself. Yeah, as John said, I have got a 30 years experience sourcing external funding, and previously I worked for a charity in nature conservation for 20 years, but later as a parish councillor in Staffordshire. And I was also a member of the bottom left there. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the leader programmes, but I was a member of Staffordshire Leader for 6 years. And through this EU programme, we distributed £2 million to rural projects up to 2019, and that included quite a few town and parish councils. And now, as part of my own work, I have been supporting NALC and several county associations with training and just supporting local councils as well with grant bids and funding strategies. And I'll quickly look today at these key potential sources for councils today, and they'll include the national lottery sources, landfill grants via Entrust, different local and principal authority grants, and the many independent trusts, foundations, and other potential sources. And in recent years, I'm sorry to sort of start off with a bit of a negative, but there is no magic wonder at the moment with funding. We have seen a real big loss of funding opportunities for local councils. First off, through austerity especially, we lost a number of key funding streams, particularly with cuts to national agencies and to local authorities, principal authorities. And this really did result in greatly reduced funding for their grant schemes. And then following Brexit, structural EU funding sources have now come to an end. And the UK received £11 billion between 2014 and 2020 just from this one source. And this money was allocated to, if you've heard of them, the local enterprise partnerships, the LEPs, to spend locally, and that tended to trickle down to community level. And the government shared prosperity fund is now being rolled out, and DEFRA, if you've heard of it, has launched the rural fund as well, but it is very unlikely to see the equivalent support that we had before. And then, of course, finally, COVID-19, of course, changed everything. With the onset of the pandemic, most grants switched their attention to COVID-19 relief applications. And of course, many councils, you'll be aware, you lost some really vital income because of closed facilities and cancelled events. So local councils have to be savvier than ever before to attract grants. And you really need to know what funders are looking for. So even before the pandemic, I'd noted a growing focus to enhance community well-being as part of criteria. And this included opportunities for healthier lifestyles and places to live in and use. And now there's even a even greater growing emphasis to enhance mental and physical health. So these are all things that are worth remembering, these sort of changes. And with increased concerns of climate change as well and the biodiversity crisis, many funders are favouring applications with environmental or sustainability benefits or a flavour. So just do remember those. So quickly looking at the grants available to councils, the Community Fund is one of the main 4 distributors of national lottery funding, and it's the one that's most widely used by town and parish councils. There's 2 main Community Fund grants for councils to consider. Awards for All is probably one that most of you have used, and it's the smaller and most popular, and it provides up to £10,000, and it's quite a relatively simple grant to apply for. Reaching Communities is the larger fund, and it now provides grants for up to £100,000, although that can be variable. And the Partnerships Programme is very similar to Reaching Communities, but it's for organisations that work together across sectors on projects. And the Community Fund is always adding different grants. You have to sort of really watch out on their website. The latest one was bringing people together, and this aims to build stronger connections across communities, but it is still quite relevant to local councils. So do keep an eye on their website. And there's also, of course, other national lottery distributors to consider. So you might be familiar, use the Sports England grant or the Heritage Fund, National Heritage Fund, or even the Arts Council England for their type of community project. These all come from the same distributor, so only one application can be made to any of these for the same project. So you can't use one or you can't use 2 or 3 for the same project. Just something worth remembering. And of course, the Landfill Communities Fund, this is a tax credit scheme that enables waste operators to contribute money to whatever established funding organisation that they've got. And I know that some people find landfill operators a little bit complicated to deal with, especially if they require things like contributing third-party payments. But I have to confess that I've had really good success working with them, and I would recommend if you've got a project, do look at them. Some of the main LCF trusts, I've included 3 on the left-hand side and 1 in the middle of the main ones that are generally distributed around the country. But there are others on the right-hand side and probably additional to this as well that are active throughout the UK. And most of these have a postcode checker on their website just to see if your project is located in the proximity of a qualifying waste operating site or a quarry. So that is the only downside. It is a bit of a lottery depending on your location, but do consider landfill tax operators. They're a really great source. And you will all have unitary or district or borough councils that in your area. So even if funding and in-kind support has been seriously curtailed, some councils still provide some form of community funding, which you should know about really. And it's usually small funds now that you're not going to get the large funds like they were in the past, but they are still worth considering. And of course, you might have access to funders, which only provide grants in your local area, your part of the county or your region. And these grants can tend to come and go. So do keep an eye on local notices. For where I live, we have a Severn Trents Community Fund, which is a great fund, but it is very heavily used at the moment, and there's a lot of subscribers to that. And I should have said really with the community fund as well, that they've said that they have an unprecedented amount of applications at the moment. So I am afraid that the competition is really, really tight for a lot of these grants at the moment. You've got a shrinking pool of sources and more people needing funding. So it is quite difficult, especially for local councils. Charities tend to have more of a benefit when it comes to meeting criteria of a lot of these organisations. And also funding for biodiversity has been seriously curtailed over the past decade, but there are still opportunities available. There's some uncertainty, I don't know if you read about it, about the government's environmental land management schemes here in the top left. But if you manage countryside holdings, there is access to countryside stewardship grants still, or if you're enhancing land by a main river, there may be funding from the Environment Agency. And there's also organisations like the Tree Council and Woodland Trust who provide support for things like tree and hedgerow planting. And again, principal councils may have funds for adaptation to climate change and green energy projects especially. But meanwhile, the government, they also launch regular schemes as well, often through organisations such as Salix, which you might be familiar with, especially for green energy projects. And hopefully, as public concern over climate change and the biodiversity crisis grows, more funding opportunities will start becoming available again in the near future, fingers crossed. I know it's a very difficult situation for everyone at the moment, and the government are pulling back on quite a few funding schemes. And we mustn't forget the non-grant funding sources. So council can tap into social investment in the form of special loans. So you probably may be familiar with a Public Works Loan Board, where you try to maybe put your precept a little bit higher over a number of years to actually pay back these loans. And meanwhile, donated income can be a really useful way, of course, to generate core funds, especially to help support match funding towards grants. And local councils tend to be really good at this, especially with arranging events to raise money for different causes. I mentioned charitable status because the funding system seems very structured against local councils, and it's something that's become clearer and clearer to me over the last sort of decade, that local councils are left competing for increasingly scarce grants from the few funders that include them as eligible in their criteria. And even then, they often fall into categories that are deemed of insufficient need. So you might tick all the boxes, but especially if you're a rural council, you'll seldom meet their demographic or their deprivation or ethnic minority indices. So it can be really difficult for a lot of local councils to actually source this funding. But there is an opportunity to gain charitable status for projects that the councils help manage. So it's not for your council itself, but it would be for a project. And CIO status has been used by various councils around the country, which I'm familiar with, especially to set up these projects and develop funding bids, particularly though in partnership with other stakeholders or partners in their town or in their parish. And charitable status can seem a bit daunting, I know. And I appreciate many are put off by concerns over transferring council assets to a CIO. But there are big benefits as it opens up opportunities, and with many big funding organisations which only provide grants to charities. And as well as many smaller trusts, that there's a number of really large foundations that can compete with some of these lottery providers. And these offer grants for charitable community projects. And these four are some of the bigger ones, but there's quite a few out there. So that I've just quickly covered some of the grants that are and the funding sources. Normally, if I do a training session on this, I'd be an hour talking about those and going into depth. So there is a lot to think about, but there are sources out there. But coming to actually writing more successful bids, knowing how to develop and write these successful bids is a really key skill, especially more now than ever, really. With the current climate, with the cost of living crisis and the restrictions on funding. And when it comes to personnel, no matter the size of your council, the impetus to put together a good sized bid usually revolves around a few dynamic and energetic individuals. And these are usually the people who are able to come up with those good project ideas in the first place, the ones who can garner support and also drive that project forward. And then, of course, ultimately write those successful funding applications. And I find that projects or funding bids don't usually get off the ground unless you have one or two of the necessary people willing or able to go through the process of developing project bids and submitting good applications. And I'm not talking about the smaller bids for a couple of £1,000. It tends to be the projects I'm talking about. And it's these individuals with the necessary experience and aptitude that are so useful in developing successful funding bids. And in terms of capacity, no matter the bid or project size, you will need enough of these key people to see it through. So ideally, any bid should really be developed by a small working group of councillors and the clerk working together as a team. I do like this photo on the right-hand side because it is actually a genuine photo I found of a funding committee from a parish council, and they seem like quite a jolly lot. So it just shows that it is about teamwork, really, and it's really important not to rely on your clerk to do all the work for bigger funding bids. And that's especially important for councillors to remember. And I've seen lots of examples since I've been working my own consultancy where clerks have had very little support from councillors on some of these projects and some of these bids. And it really isn't fair on the officers. But I also found as well that it rarely works as well because there's just too much to do for some of these clerks, especially on the bigger projects. So I'll just go back. But as we know, councillors, I don't want to be unfair to councillors. I know that many councillors do have busy lives, or your council may not have the individuals, not being unfair, but with the specific aptitude to develop projects or write complex funding bids. And they can be quite complex. And unless you can afford to buy in support, one answer is to try and build your own capacity in-house. So first off, you plan to build that amongst your existing councillors and staff. And some skills can be developed and nurtured over time, so to enhance experience and confidence in writing bids. But secondly, you can look outside your council for assistance. There's usually a great untapped resource of people in our communities who've got relevant skills to offer. And you might already know some individuals. A lot of councils were really good at this during neighbourhood plans when they drew in people from their communities and neighbourhoods. People who didn't want to join the council but did want to actually contribute something. So you could put requests out through your newsletters, social media, website and notice boards. Even if it's just for a temporary venture, it's something that you can consider. So going back to where to start, it can be a bewildering process. You often just want to get on and start applying for funding. But from dealing with so many councils and charities in recent years, I've yet to see one organisation anywhere near ready to start the application process. And that has really surprised me, actually. Invariably, they've all had to take some significant steps back before they're ready. And the real work of any bid comes in preparing your project. So if you take anything away from today, really, it's just that preparation and planning. It's so important. So before you start, really do think carefully about what you specifically want the funding for. So prioritise what the council needs rather than what you'd like. And all funders want to see a really well-prepared bid. I know that from sitting on the other side of the table, and with a good rationale and clear details how it's going to be implemented, and things like fully costed items or quotes if possible, and where relevant, any planning permission is in place or has been sought. And proof of any match funding has been sourced. So that's really important. And sometimes just putting together a simple plan or a strategy in advance, it can really help. And this can also focus your thoughts on your ideas, your priorities, and your processes that you're going to go through. And it also helps you anticipate the type of questions that funders are likely to ask. And they will be asking you questions as you go through the process. And this could include the basic questions like I've included at the bottom left here with the who's, the what's, the why, how types of questions. And also consider the feasibility or viability of any of your projects and aims. So funders want to know if your aims are achievable. Is there a need or a demand for the project? And who's going to benefit and why do they need this project? Other things might include what's the long-term viability of the project? So that they often call it sustainability. And how will facilities be maintained, and have you future-proofed plans? These are all terms that you'll find more and more used now by funders. So might it leave a lasting effect or a positive legacy? And sometimes that can be quite difficult to think about, especially for short-term projects, but they are questions that you will get asked. And what evidence are there that your proposals are going to achieve value for money? You'll usually need to use a project breakdown as well, so just be prepared for that. And then other questions like, are there any alternatives? So if you're, say, looking to build a community hall or an extension, could it possibly have a detrimental impact on stakeholders elsewhere if you've got another hall in your village or in your town? And what have you done to mitigate this? So and also don't be put off if you have to develop a business plan, especially for bigger grants. And I've had to do a few in recent years. It does sound daunting, but they're not so difficult as they sound. And there's lots of examples and templates on Google with really simple guidance that you can use. Excuse me. An essential piece of supporting information is evidence that the project has the full support of stakeholders. This is something that I do find that councils are often not really prepared for, or they don't appreciate fully. It does need to be proper and genuine consultation and engagement. And remember that stakeholder support will greatly strengthen a project, especially when requesting larger sums. Again, that you'll need to show how you've engaged with the stakeholders. Most of these fund now, they want to see bottom-up projects that are community driven, and that's often quite difficult for us to achieve, but we haven't really got much choice at the moment. And many councils do misunderstand the difference between information and engagement, so it is essential that you provide good evidence of any involvement of your stakeholders, and show that how this has helped determine choices and decisions, because funders really do want to see community driven projects. Again, like not down this top-down initiatives, but community-driven, and utilize any data sources that you can that demonstrate demographic patterns or deprivation indices if you can. So really do play to those as well. And if possible, speak with funding officers at an early stage to discuss your project and to get an idea of its viability or any recommendations. There's also lots of grant fairs around the country now. This slide I've used from the Yorkshire example that I did recently, but they can be really useful for speaking to people and picking up ideas. And even before the pandemic, many were starting to be held online too. So they can be really, really useful. And I must say, even now, I still could learn quite a lot from these fairs and just getting to chat to some of the people there. Every grant has a section, how to apply and the key criteria they're looking for. And the challenge is to scan this information and filter what's relevant. I've used a matchmaker slide here. I'm not sure if they still make them or not, but it's effectively what you're doing. It is a compatibility process, matching your bid to the type of projects and the grant that you're looking for. And a huge proportion of unsuccessful bids simply arise because the applications are ineligible or don't meet the criteria. I can't remember where I saw the figure, but something like over 60% of all bids that are unsuccessful at the first stage. And that's a real wasted amount of time and resources, from not just from the people applying, but also for the funders as well to have to go through these. And properly assessing the eligibility criteria is a major part of the application process, and it will serve you well. Plus it will save you much time and effort, as I say. So the first stage of filtering it is the simplest. Just like look out for the obvious generic eligibility and compatibility criteria. So for instance, it might be things like communities, health, sports, arts or education. And these are your obvious signposts. And then look for more subtle requirements, such as a geographical location. Perhaps it might have a strong rural or urban focus, or it might be time related to a certain fixed period, which you find with quite a few grants, especially the ones that pop up, they come and go. And all these factors help determine whether or not a grant is the right one for you. So it really is a box ticking exercise. Sorry to sound very cynical, but that's what it is really, just to filter how much criteria you can meet. And focus on the key words that funders use. I go through the criteria and guidelines and I highlight the terms that seem most important. I've got my trusty highlighter pen here, and with some grants that I'm really confident about, I will actually, I'm quite a dinosaur, and I'll still print off some of the criteria and I go through it with my highlighter, because I like to see it in paper and I like to just keep on top of it that way. But you can do this on your screen anyway. But it can be any terms, again, like I said before about those other criteria terms, just things like, it could be terms like community, rural, environment, biodiversity. These are the sort of things that might really be real good links for what you're trying to achieve in your project or your bid. And if the grant does seem a good match, then you can build your application around these key terms, and don't be afraid to keep repeating them and keep using them, because that's what the funder wants to see. I know that from having gone through grant applications myself. You're looking for those key words to be used, and it's always worth using the SMART objectives with what you provide, as on the slide there. And remember, only answer questions that are being asked. So don't be tempted to add other information, because you will have a limited space or a set number of words to use. So use your text precisely and effectively. And I know that's easier said than done. Sometimes it might take a few goes at it, and get someone else to check it for you. I still do it myself. I confess my wife goes through all my applications now, even after all these years. And if possible, it always helps to look at other successful case studies. Many bigger grants include examples of previous successful projects or organisations, often from local councils. So this can give you a really good indication of the types of projects that the funder prefers. And sometimes you might need to tweak or adapt your plans just to meet enough of that grant criteria. And this refocus shouldn't be viewed as mission creep or a compromise just to try and chase funding. But it is more of a balancing act, really, especially if the grant is not leading your project in the wrong direction. But I do appreciate, though, it's equally important that you never try to force fit your project just to meet an inappropriate grant. And I've been guilty of that in the past, and it just doesn't work. And the sort of occasions you might want to adapt your bid might come at the initial stage when you realise that you might need to downsize or make your project more focused. Or conversely, you might want to broaden your project to diversify what you're delivering or who's benefiting. And it can seem a bit cynical, but sometimes you do have to go the extra mile just to shape your bid to meet their criteria. And your application will also need to stand out more than ever before, which is something I'm emphasising to everyone at the moment, that especially with the stiff competition. So do remember any unique selling points. Sorry for this management jargon, but that is a really good term to use. You do have to stand out from the crowd. So it's really important, of course, never to be dishonest, but do talk up your bid, because applying for funding is ultimately it's a marketing exercise, really. You're trying to sell your council and your project to the funder, and you're trying to inspire them as well. So help funders to understand any tangible benefits that the grant will make, and stress what makes your bid stand out from others. And it's really important as well that you don't just think about what funding could achieve today. Realistically consider what you will require in the long term. And funders want to see that as well. So for instance, what will your community look like in 5, 10, 15 years time? And will those stakeholders what will they need from your project or facilities then? So communities that do change, especially with the amount of housing we have and changing demographics. And local councils are in a really good position to anticipate your own community's social, economic and demographic patterns. So this is where I mentioned future-proofing before, but this is where it does help to future-proof plans to cope with any potential trends and changes. And I have to confess that my experience with town and parish councils and charities is they're not aspirational enough. So never overstretch yourself or pursue a project you're not sure you want, but do think carefully about how you can best achieve your project goal or make the most of whatever funding opportunities that are available. Because funders really do want to see ambitious and innovative projects. And I know that from going through leader applications. We wanted something different, something that would inspire, not the same old sort of applications. And if you are particularly risk averse, or overcautious, your project might not fill its potential. And if you don't ask, you don't get. So don't just think about sort of like-for-like applications. Do think of something that's quite innovative. and quite different. And I know that's not always easy, but that's what funders are looking for now. Unfortunately, we haven't got much choice. And funders are also increasingly looking for applicants to work with partners. And it won't always be appropriate for you, I know, but it can really strengthen your bid or add greater credibility if you can involve other organisations. So do think about who you might team up with. It might be just a very simple collaboration or partnership just to help out with parts of the project. Even just getting the support or endorsement of organisations can really help as well. So that's something just considering, because funders really do like to see this at the moment, this partnership approach. And people like the community fund and some of those big trusts and foundations I mentioned will only now fund certain of their funds, and certain of their grants will only support partnership applications. And if it is a large project, you might also benefit from submitting a package of grant bids, which you might have already done yourself in the past. And I've just shown two there together on the slide, but it doesn't have to be too complicated. The main benefit is obviously that it allows you to apply for a greater total sum of money, and multiple bids help combine grants to help match fund each other as well. And once you've written one bid, it's relatively easy then just to cut and paste your text for different grants, or use the same supporting information. And there's a number of local or national organisations to go to for support. Your own county association will provide regular funding information. And they'll also be passing on any updates from NAUC as well, the national organisation. And if you're a clerk and a member, then SLCC provide funding information as well, which is always worth sharing with councillors. That's the one thing. Do share, if you are a clerk, do share this information with councillors, because some of the seeds of some of these ideas for applications can actually come from that side. And there's also NCVO and a Small Charities Coalition, who both provide similar information, and some of their free guidance and tips on applications is particularly useful, even for local councils. I'm coming towards the end now, so there will be a chance for some questions. There's also support online to help with bid writing and news of grants. I use Grants Online at the top left there, and that is the most comprehensive site, but you do have to pay for that. It's a subscription site, but there are short-term subscriptions for set periods like 1 month and 3 months. It can be quite useful if you're just looking for a short period. And My Community also supports community groups with regular updates. Funding Central is a free website you might be able to tap into. And the Heritage Funding Directory, there's a few sites like this, and this is just a free guide for anyone undertaking heritage projects with lots of different grants in there. So it's just really interesting. I've used it now, and I didn't even know it was there until I started looking. And be prepared to look far and wide. There's even a directory of grant-making trusts at the bottom there, if you've got the time. And if you've got time and patience, then you can't beat a bit of DIY research on Google. Especially to source the main current grants currently available, and to see any changes in there, especially in criteria. So I'm sorry, I have rushed through that. That's normally a 2.5 hour webinar that I deliver there, or training session. But just to give you a taste of what grants are out there, what they're really looking for, and what it takes to actually put together a bid. So just in summary, just to remember that to utilise the best people that are available to you at your council or within your community. Fully prepare and plan your project. That's the main thing to come out of today, hopefully. Don't forget to gather your evidence of need and start on this as soon as possible. It can save you a lot of time and effort, and sometimes you might get halfway down the road and realise that there isn't the support or the need for a project as much as you might want to achieve it. Do read the eligibility criteria as closely as possible. That's really, really important. Be adaptive and ambitious, and that's probably more important now than ever. I wouldn't have emphasised this so much 5-10 years ago, but now it is really, really important. And do remember then just to build a convincing case and to try and go through some of the processes that I've mentioned. Okay, then I've gone through that quite quickly.
Oh, that's perfect, Mike. Thank you very much. So we're going to go to Q&A in a minute. Feel free to drop some questions on the chat. Also, I would like you to ask the questions, so unmute yourself and put on your video, which would be best. But before we do that, I'll just give you a little, if I could take 3 minutes of your time, just to give you a little overview of Scribe. I love that point, that opening point that Mike said. For funding opportunities, it needs to be grassroots, bottom-up initiatives, which we always use this term, big ideas start in small places. We love working with town and parish councils because it is the tier of government that closest connected to people. And we really want to be in a position to enable your big ideas. But first, we want to enable you to get the time to spend to put the effort into grant funding applications. So in order to do that, we want to reduce the time it takes for you to do your administration tasks, to make it much more simple, using easy-to-use software to reduce all your admin tasks, reduce all that stress and sometimes isolation that you may feel, through also supporting you in sort of training events like this and also our own training. How we do that, we have 4 main products. Our key one is accounts, managing your financial accounts, but also do cemetery, facilities hire and management, and allotments. These are all cloud-based apps that are available on an annual subscription. And a good example of that, of one of our customers, Sally, at the time that she said she saved by using our products, she was able to secure £52,000 of funding, which was triple her income, of 16,000 from a precept. And she used this to make some changes to her buildings to make it more climate efficient, and also in extending the hours of her community cafe. So we love that as a really good example of the time that she saved you doing kind of, let's say, boring administration. She's able to redirect that time to get really good at applying for grants. We're a small but growing company. We have over 950 customers now throughout England and Wales, both small parishes and large town councils. All our products come with free training, support, and unlimited users. You can give your councillors access to the services in read-only mode, and you can access it anywhere. So if you want to know more about us, feel free to just drop yes in the chat and we can have a little chat with you. So over to questions. We've got a few there. So Simon, feel free to turn on your camera and unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hi, thanks very much for that, Mike and John. We're trying to replace a 50-year-old sports and social club pavilion with a new building, and trying to raise something approaching £1 million. We're looking at one of the sources as being a Public Works Loan Board loan, taken out over something like 30 years, and we need some initial funding to do the next stage of design work. I'm wondering whether to take out a separate loan for that, for about 35,000, and then wait until we hopefully get all the other funding in place, or whether to get approval for a larger loan. We're talking about something like 300,000, and then draw down as we need it, but starting with the 35,000. But I just wondered if you had any experience or advice of what the benefits or pitfalls of different approaches might be.
Well, on the actual specifics of whether short term or long term, if you're quite convinced that you will be spending all of that money, that it's not something that you need some short term funding for, I'd be tempted to go for the bigger loan, really, and go through the normal processes that a lot of councils do, is to engage with their community first, just to see if there's consensus for getting that loan, because I presume you'll have to be paying this through your precept, raising your precept. The engagement is just as important, but my thoughts on that would be probably the longer term loan, really. The bigger loan would make more sense, but without knowing the specifics of the project, I couldn't sort of say for definite, but that would be my initial thought.
Okay, thank you.
Have you used loans before for council?
Yeah, either or. Thank you, mate. Take care.
There was one some time ago. It was a 25-year loan taken out to buy a piece of land that was paid off some time ago. I'm not absolutely sure who that was through, but
okay. I'm happy to speak to you about it separately if you want. So just
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, Simon, we're sharing in the follow-up email. Jess will be sending out along. She might write a blog post as well. We'll be sharing Mike's contact details. Okay. They're also in the chat there as well. His phone number, email, etc. Yeah. Question.
Thank you,
Nancy. You got a question, Nancy?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I posted it in the chat. We're thinking about building a multi-use games area, probably up to about £100,000, of which the parish council will probably has got reserves of by that time possibly 50,000. But it's really public participation and engagement. Do you have any advice on how we roll that out? How we get the parishioners to get involved? Where do we start asking the questions? Are there formats and ideas and anything out there that would help, please?
Yeah, there's quite. I've seen so many councils who've implemented or actually built muggers, the multi-use games areas, and sometimes like they're great successes. We've got one in our village which we've got funding for, but sometimes they can be white elephants. I think it's really important that a council I was talking to last week, a town council, were thinking of this in an area of their town, but they didn't really have the demographics for it, and we talked it through, and they're going to go through an engagement exercise. But it's quite hard. You have to be very careful about who you're engaging on this, because it tends to be teenagers who tend to use the muggers. It's not the younger children, or it tends to be sort of 12, 13 up to about 20 who tend to use muggers. So that in terms of engagement with that age group, it can be quite difficult. You will have to use social media and probably use platforms of social media that a lot of us aren't familiar with. So it's the sort of thing that you need to go to your community and find out how those people talk to each other, that age group, how you can engage with them. But there's all the different platforms. My daughters would know what they were, but I don't. I'm on Facebook and Twitter, but the people who use a mugger won't be on those platforms. So that would be the main way. You could even try to have an event, an open day, to try and sort of consult people. But I do find people of a certain age aren't as easy to engage, and especially that is the one age group that's the hardest. Primary school age is fine. You can go to schools, you can go to family events and get families out, but teenage children is very difficult. So try to engage through social media. That'd be my recommendation. But do your work on the demographics as well. Find out that you've got the population who can actually participate and use it fully. I think there might be some figures out there about what sort of numbers of population would support some of these sporting activities and facilities. So, okay. So I'll have a look and see if I can find them if you want.
That would be lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. Any more? Robin, did you have a question? You there, Robin?
Yes, sorry. We got builders in, so some noise. I apologize. You mentioned demographics and population. Does anyone know when the lower level super output area data from the 2021 census will be released? We keep hearing it's next month, but it's been next month for quite a few months.
Open no. Alternative. What data do you normally use, Mike, for demographics?
It's all 2011 data at the moment still, so
okay,
10 years out of date, and things are changing very much very quickly. So yeah, hopefully it'll be out very soon. I haven't seen a date for it though, I must admit, Robin. So if anyone else here knows, great. But yeah, 2011, it does sound a bit dated now, 11 years, especially with some of the changes there's been.
Quite exactly. I mean, we're doing a neighbourhood plan at the same time, and obviously funding and neighbourhood plans are very often linked, and it's difficult getting a straight answer. Even our district council don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any more questions? If not, I'll ask you a question, Mike, and then also I'll ask the audience a question, like if there's any, because we had quite a few people that successfully raised funding.
I think Andrew just raised it.
Oh.
Could I just ask a question?
Yes.
We're going for a fairly ambitious bid of something like $1 million, a bit like the previous speaker as well. Simon mentioned that. but it's slightly complicated in that we want to buy a piece of land with 2 properties on it. And the idea is to sell one of those to recuperate part of the costs. Do you see any difficulties with that from a bidding point of view? Is there something that's you've got experience of, and how do you think we would be best to approach that?
I think as long as the land is valued through the public valuer and it's all done by board, no, I don't see any problem with that at all, really. Is the land of any other particular value? You're going to sell it for development, I take it?
No, we're not. The idea is that we're going to use that land to replace land we've lost for. Oh, sorry, I've got a dog barking. 14 acres with an agricultural tie, which we're working on breaking, or at least for part of it. The idea is to use that land for replacing the football pitch that we've lost, replacing recreation facilities, and also for building environmentally advantageous woods, wildflower meadows, things like this, to try and improve the environment. We'd keep one of the buildings for a village hall, which we haven't got here in the village. The other would sell, as I mentioned. So the idea is to use the land.
No, that sounds fine. Effectively, what you're doing is offsetting, isn't it? So I've seen a couple of cases. There's one in Cheshire, a community centre I went to look at, where they actually sold off part of their land for a retirement home, and with the money built a community centre. And that's quite a common thing that occurs, be it for like housing or development or whatever. And it's a similar sort of thing what you're doing. I think it's just offsetting one project against another just to be able to fund it. And as long as your community is okay with that and it's all done legally, then that's absolutely fine, Andrew. I don't see any problem at all with that.
Super. Thanks for your help.
Great. And yeah, as I was saying, a lot of people successfully raised funding grants. If anyone else has got any additional advice, feel free to kind of offer it to the audience here. Just drop a comment in the chat, and then I'll call you to the panel. But otherwise, Mike, so how do you know? So presumably you help town and parish councils through their funding process. Kind of what kind of model do you do? How do people work with you?
In 2 ways, really. I tend to, first of all, I tend to write them a funding assessment first, just to tell them about how feasible the funding would be. If there's they'll tell me what project they want. And I don't like to go straight into sort of applying for grants. I'll let them know initially how viable it is. So as I say, that's when recently it's become a little bit of a negative story, that a lot of the sources have closed. There's a lot of closed doors. So I'll have to be honest and say, yes, you meet the criteria for this, but you've very stiff competition. So I know of a grant that, for a community fund for reaching communities that was put in last year, and it met all the criteria. It did really well, but it failed simply because of competition. There were too many other really good projects going for the bid. So there are sort of things that I will outline first. And then if the council want me to go ahead, then I will put in applications for them. But usually the first thing I do is put together a feasibility study or some sort of funding plan for them.
Okay, and how long does that normally take?
The funding plan depends on the size of the project, really. It could be a day's work, or it could be just 2 or 3 days work. Okay. Then it goes back to the council to consider and to look at the options. It's all about giving councils options, really, about what grants to go for. And then just looking at, I tried to give them some sort of idea of how viable it will be, and what they're always looking for percentages. Say, like, how likely is it we're going to get funding for this? And you can't guarantee anything, but so some grants you can say, yeah, that's a great project. You should be really in a good position for that. But the like-for-like projects are just not getting funding now. Things like, as well, about play areas, muggers, those sorts of things, really hard to get funding for. And I'm quite honest with council about that now. It has to be really innovative, and it has to be community-driven. And I mentioned before about those things about well-being and mental and physical health are really coming in now, and especially the environmental benefits. They're really, really important.
Good, good, cool. Okay. Any more advice from anybody else? Any more questions? Otherwise, we'll call it a wrap. If you could turn on your cameras and wave and say thanks to Mike. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for taking the time to educate us today. Really appreciate it. We'll be sending you a copy of a recording of the event, along with probably a blog post, and sharing Mike's details. So if you have any aspirations for raising funding, he's the man to contact. Otherwise, everyone have a really good day, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Thank
Cheers.
you. Bye.
Thank you.